If I hadn't gotten food poisoning that night, I'd probably still believe she loved me. Sounds ridiculous, right? One bad bowl of shrimp scampi, and the whole illusion cracked wide open. But that's how life works sometimes. It's not the big things. It's the small ones, the accidental moments that hit the hardest. I met Laura at a backyard barbecue 9 years ago. Central California heat, cheap beer, dogs weaving between lawn chairs. One of those afternoons that feels like it could go on forever. She wasn't even supposed to be there, she tagged along with a friend of a friend. Torn jeans, vintage tee, sandals. Smiled like she'd done it 1,000 times and meant it every time. I was 34. Nothing flashy. Managed logistics for a mid-size food distribution company. Lived alone in the same house my uncle left me when he passed. Paid everything early. Did my own oil changes. If there was an Olympic sport for reliability, I would have medaled. She said that's what drew her in. Said she was tired of chaos. Tired of guys who disappeared or couldn't keep a plant alive, let alone a relationship. She moved in a year later. We got married the year after that, small vineyard ceremony, 6 tables, Costco wine. I remember looking at her under those string lights and thinking, finally. Like I'd stepped out of the waiting room of my own life. That was 6 years ago. The cracks didn't show right away. They rarely do. Looking back now, I realize things had already shifted before that night. She laughed less around me. Smiled more at her phone. When she went out with friends, she started coming back looking lighter. Brighter. Like whatever weight she carried with me, she left at the door when she left the house. One time I asked her what was so funny, and she said, "It's just group chat stuff. You wouldn't get it." I laughed like it didn't sting. But it did. That Saturday, I was supposed to go to her friend Nikki's birthday dinner with her. Swanky tapas place downtown. But around 3 p.m., something hit me, sharp cramps, cold sweat, the whole nine. I told her to go without me. She hesitated, said she could cancel, but I waved her off. "Just bring me back something salty," I said, half laughing from the couch. She leaned down, kissed my forehead. "You sure?" I nodded. "Go." The second the door closed, I curled back up and slept. Woke up sometime after 10, dry mouth, head pounding. Went to the kitchen for water, then remembered, my wallet was still in her glove box. I'd left it there after buying gas in her car earlier in the week. Figured I'd grab it now. I wasn't going anywhere, but it'd stop me from forgetting later. I walked out front, barefoot. Her car was parked crooked in the driveway, like she'd just pulled up and rushed in. Windows cracked, keys gone. Wait. She was home. I paused, trying to make sense of it. Then I heard something. Laughter. Music. Coming from the backyard. I stepped around the house, staying behind the fence line, hidden by the hedge. The patio lights were on. There she was. Laura. Along with 4 of her friends. Wine glasses in hand. Cozy clothes. No sign of any fancy dinner. Not even makeup on. "Wait, wait," one of them said, giggling. And then Laura said it. Clear as day. "I only stayed with Josh in case Dylan flaked again." And guess what? He did. They all howled. Like it was the funniest thing they'd ever heard. One of them, Sarah, maybe, fake gasped. "You're awful." Laura shrugged. "I'm not stupid. I needed someone solid in case the real thing fell through. Josh is insurance. Boring, dependable insurance." Another wave of laughter. But what got me, what gutted me, was what happened next. She laughed the hardest I'd seen in months. Head thrown back. Eyes closed. A deep, full-body laugh. Not once had she laughed like that with me lately. That was the moment. Not the words. That was the moment I knew the woman I married wasn't coming back. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I stayed behind the hedge like a ghost watching his own life go on without him. Eventually, they moved on to talking about some concert. More giggles. More wine. I crept back inside, sat on the floor in the dark living room, and stared at nothing for a long time. She came in an hour later, humming. She leaned over the back of the couch and whispered, "Feeling better, babe?" I nodded. A little. She kissed my cheek and went off to bed. I stayed there on the couch, cold and awake. That was the night I stopped being her placeholder, and started being a mirror. Not angry. Not loud. Just clear. The next morning, I made her breakfast. French press, 2 sugars. Asked how Nikki's dinner was. She said it was fun but loud. Nikki drank too much, she added with a smile. I nodded. That day, I went into the garage. Dug out the old cedar chest where I kept my dad's things. He was a quiet man, veteran, mechanic, wrote everything in notebooks instead of saying it out loud. He used to tell me, "You want to know someone's real face? Shut your mouth. Watch. Listen." I dusted off the top journal. The one with the blue cover. Read a few pages. Then I put it on my desk and left it open. Laura had her backup plan. She just didn't know mine already had a name. If she had asked me directly, even once, "Did you hear what I said that night?" I don't know what I would have done. Maybe I would have lied. Maybe I would have told the truth just to see what her face would do. But she never asked, and that told me everything I needed to know. She thought the lie was buried. She thought the man sitting across from her each morning was still clueless, still grateful, still hooked. She was wrong. The morning after her backyard confession, I made coffee like usual. Same French press, same 2 sugars. I set her mug on the table and asked if she wanted eggs. She said she wasn't hungry, barely looked up. That used to bother me. It didn't anymore. She had no idea how easy she'd made things. I didn't argue with her, didn't press her on where she'd really been that weekend, or who she kept texting when she turned her phone away from me. I let it all sit. Silence makes people sloppy. I started going for early walks, mostly to be out of the house before she got up. The streets were quiet, cold. Gave me time to think. Gave her space to drift further away without me having to push. She noticed, of course. Asked one morning if I was okay. I said I was fine. She asked if I was sure. I said, just needed some air. She nodded like she believed me, but not all the way. That week, I started keeping receipts. Not hers, mine. Little things. Purchases, notes, screenshots of texts she probably thought were harmless. Just a habit. In case I ever needed to remember when I stopped being the fool. She went out more. Stayed gone longer. Came home full of stories that didn't line up, but I didn't correct her. Let her talk. She mentioned someone named Dylan again, just a friend from before, she said once, out of nowhere. I nodded. I think she wanted to say more, but I didn't give her the opening. Sometimes silence is louder than a fight. We were still sleeping in the same bed. But by then, it felt more like a ceasefire than a marriage. One night, she came home late, slid under the covers, and said, "I've been thinking about maybe going to Santa Cruz for a little while. Just to clear my head. I could stay with Nikki's cousin." I didn't look up. I just said, "Do what you need." She exhaled like she'd been holding her breath. She told her sister I'd been distant lately. I know because I overheard her on speaker while she was cooking. Said I'd been acting different, getting up early, quiet, distracted. Like she was planting her alibi in advance. It wasn't fear in her voice, it was calculation. That's when I knew this wasn't a drift. This was strategy. She wasn't waiting to see if she could leave. She was building the story that made her the one abandoned. One night she came into the garage while I was sanding down a piece of scrap wood I'd turned into a planter. "You've been spending a lot of time out here," she said. I nodded. "Just needed something to do." She leaned against the doorway for a second, then said, "You know, it's okay to talk to me." I looked at her. She looked tired. Not physically. Just worn in that way people get when they think their lies are starting to get too close to the surface. I wanted to say it right then. Wanted to ask her how it felt to be in the same room with the man she lied to, laughed about, dismissed. But I didn't. I just said, "We're fine, Laura." And she didn't argue. Later that night, while she was watching something on her tablet, I went through my dad's journal again. He wrote a line I hadn't noticed before: "When they start rewriting the story while you're still in it, let them. Every false sentence becomes evidence." I wrote that one down separately, folded it into my wallet. The next morning, she asked if I wanted to come to a Sunday market with her. Said she thought it would be good for us. I looked at her for a long second. Not angry. Not cold. Just measuring. Then I said, "I'll pass. But thanks for asking." She didn't bring it up again. She went alone. Or said she did. I didn't check. That same week, she came home from another retreat, same excuse, different town. I asked her how it went. She smiled too wide and said, "It helped me realize what I want." I asked if she figured out what that was. She hesitated, then said, "Not exactly. But I know it's not this version of us." I nodded. "Okay." She blinked, like she expected more. "That's it?" "I don't think fighting for something one person already left makes much sense," I said. "Do you?" She didn't answer. That night, I heard her crying in the bathroom. Just for a few seconds. Nothing loud. Just enough to make me wonder if she finally realized she'd overplayed the hand. Or maybe she was just practicing her next story. Either way, I didn't go in. I started moving some money. Nothing suspicious. Just reallocating things. I didn't hide it, but I didn't announce it either. She never asked. I made sure everything looked like preparation, not protection. The kind of choices a man makes when he thinks about a different future. We didn't talk much after that. But she lingered more. Hovered. Like she was trying to figure out if she should say something or wait for me to go first. We moved through the house like coworkers at the end of a failed project, both knowing the outcome, neither willing to call the meeting. One night, she leaned against the hallway wall and said, "You're not going to fight me on anything, are you?" I shook my head. There's nothing left to fight over. She stared at me like she wanted to hate that answer but couldn't. Then she walked away. She had her backup plan. I had my timeline. And the clock was almost done ticking. She started using the phrase, "a clean break," more often. Said it once to Nikki on the phone while sitting 2 feet from me in the kitchen, like I wasn't even there. "I just think a clean break would be healthiest," she said, tapping her fingers on the countertop. No drama. No dragging it out. Nikki must have said something back about me because Laura replied, "No, he's not mad. That's the weird part. He's cooperative. Like he already gave up." I didn't flinch. I flipped the page in my father's journal and underlined the line I'd read twice already that morning: "A person looking to get away clean always misses one fingerprint." Laura left the house the following weekend. Said she needed space to figure out what she wanted, maybe clear her head. She told me she'd stay at Nikki's for a few days, but her bag said otherwise. It was the same black suitcase she took on our trip to Seattle, the only one big enough to live out of for a week. Maybe more. I didn't ask for details. I helped her lift it into the trunk. She thanked me like we were neighbors doing each other a favor. "I'll call in a few days," she said. I told her to take her time. That afternoon, she got an email from her wholesale supplier, one she depended on for most of her jewelry components, saying her account had been flagged for inconsistent documentation and would be temporarily paused pending review. I saw the subject line pop up on her shared desktop notifications when I walked past. I had no reason to be in her inbox, and I wasn't. But her name was on the business license. Mine was on the tax ID. She blamed their support team in a group text I later saw open on her iPad. "Unreal," she wrote. "Totally incompetent. Just trying to screw with me right when I'm relaunching." I blamed her signature. 2 nights later, I found a birthday card left open on the counter. It was addressed to her, plain white envelope, no return name. Inside, in handwriting I didn't recognize, was one short sentence: "Can't wait to build something real with you." She hadn't tried to hide it. Maybe she forgot. Maybe she thought I wouldn't look. I didn't confront her. I took a picture and slipped the card back where I found it, just a little to the left, so if she noticed it had moved, she'd have to wonder whether she was imagining things. I logged into the cloud backup of our shared business folder and adjusted a few file names. Nothing dramatic. Just cleaned up the structure, sorted invoices into new folders, updated a couple spreadsheet headers to reflect clearer authorship. It wasn't the receipts that mattered. It was whose name they were filed under. And whose wasn't. She wouldn't notice, not unless she had to prove something later. On Wednesday she texted me asking if I could send over our accountant's contact. I told her I would. I didn't. The message sat unread for 3 days before she asked again, this time adding, "It's kinda important." I replied, "Of course, I'll send it in a bit." Then nothing. She never followed up again. She was used to things just happening around her. She assumed the machine kept running even if she never checked the oil. That same week she tried logging into our shared tax prep software and got denied twice before the third attempt locked her out. She mentioned it in passing when she came by the house to grab more clothes. "By the way," she said, standing in the doorway with a half-laugh, "I think I forgot the password to the tax thing. Did you change it?" I said, "No idea. Haven't touched it in months." She nodded, unsure, then smiled like she didn't want to make it a thing. That was the first moment I saw real hesitation in her eyes. Not guilt, confusion. Like she'd lost track of where she actually stood. She lingered a minute too long before leaving. Looked around the living room like she didn't quite recognize it. "You've been keeping things really tidy," she said. "Cleaner than when I lived here." I smiled. Fewer distractions. She didn't ask what that meant. Later that night, I saw she'd blocked off a trip to Santa Cruz on the shared calendar app we still hadn't fully separated. Just a gray bar marked "Weekend Plans." No notes, no location. She had stopped pretending at that point. Or maybe she thought it didn't matter anymore. I removed the event from my view and left hers untouched. I wanted her to feel in control. That always made people miss what was behind them. Nikki posted a photo on Instagram that weekend. Just the two of them at a cafe overlooking the ocean. The angle was wrong. Reflections in the window caught a third shape, man, bald cap, half smile. I recognized the same truck from a photo Laura showed me 3 years ago. Dylan. She texted me the next day asking if I could scan and send over a copy of our old lease from 2 apartments ago, said it was for something related to her credit history. I said I'd look into it. I already had it saved. It wasn't for her credit. She was trying to untangle herself from our old co-signed accounts. I sent her the version with missing pages. She didn't follow up. That week I received an email from one of our old mutual friends asking if we were still together. I told him we were figuring things out. He said Laura had started mentioning a possible move, and had been floating the idea that I might not be around much longer. Not in a cruel way, just casual. Like I was gently exiting the stage. I thanked him for telling me. He said, "I thought you should hear it from someone who's not in her corner." She came by one more time that week, quick, just to grab some supplies. She tried the office door and found it locked. Asked if something was wrong with the handle. I said, "I've been reorganizing. Just didn't want it getting messy again." She smiled politely, didn't push. But she looked uneasy. Like maybe she was starting to feel how many things were no longer hers. She left thinking she was peeling away, leaving the old life behind cleanly. What she didn't realize was that the ground had already shifted under her feet. Her business wasn't what she thought it was. Her story wasn't going to read how she imagined. And the life she thought she was quietly slipping out of had never been as quiet as she assumed. She left thinking she'd find clarity. What she didn't know was that by Monday, clarity would come looking for her, in a way she wouldn't see coming. She called first thing Monday morning. I didn't pick up. The voicemail was short, clipped, "Hey, something's up with my payment processor. Can you call me?" I waited until the next day to text back. "What's going on?" She wrote back almost immediately, her message longer than usual. Her business account had been frozen due to a mismatch between the tax ID and the listed ownership. She'd spent hours with customer support. She said it didn't make any sense, nothing had changed on her end. I told her that was strange and asked if she had checked the documents. She said she was going to. That was the beginning of the unraveling, even if she hadn't fully seen it yet. 2 days later she tried to log into our joint bank account and found it closed. She texted again. "Did you move the money?" I said, "Only my share. Everything else is accounted for." She said we'd agreed to wait before doing anything major. I reminded her she'd already left. "I didn't think you needed to be involved in finances for a business you weren't working on anymore." She didn't reply after that. But the silence didn't last long. That Friday she showed up unannounced at the house, first time in weeks. I opened the door but didn't step aside. She looked thinner, tired, makeup smudged like she'd done it in a hurry in the car. "Can we talk?" she said. I didn't invite her in, just waited. She asked if I'd heard from Dylan. I said I hadn't. She told me he'd backed out of helping with the business. Said he didn't want to be tied to something with structural issues. I nodded. "That's probably smart," I said. Her eyes narrowed like she was trying to find a crack. "What are you doing, Josh?" I shrugged. "I'm just making sure what's mine doesn't get written out of the story." She hesitated. "You're not going to fight fair, are you?" I said, "You should have read the contract before you signed it." That's when she snapped. "I talked to a lawyer," she said. I nodded again. "Good. Make sure he reads it this time." She stared at me for a long moment like she couldn't believe how calm I was. She tried again, a different tone. "This wasn't supposed to get ugly." I looked right at her. "Then maybe you shouldn't have planned for 2 futures and waited to see which one worked out." She didn't respond. She just stood there, still holding her keys, like she wasn't sure whether to scream or cry or walk away. In the end, she did none of those things. She turned around and left without another word. Later that afternoon, I heard from a mutual friend that she'd gone into the bank in person, trying to access what was left of the old account. They said she looked panicked, nearly in tears when the clerk told her the account was closed and everything had already been split and settled. I wasn't there. I didn't need to be. That wasn't the point. The damage didn't need an audience. Her website went dark the following Monday. Hosting pulled after the ownership review. She posted a vague message about rebuilding from the ground up, followed by a string of motivational quotes and stock photos. I watched people comment things like, "You got this," and "Everything happens for a reason." They had no idea what was really happening. They just saw another glossy restart. But behind the scenes, she was unraveling. She tried to relaunch under a new name. Different logo, different color palette, same product. The issue was that most of the contacts she'd built the business with had already moved on. I had informed them months earlier of structural changes, and they'd followed me to the new site without hesitation. The email list was mine. The vendor relationships were mine. The reputation? That had always been ours publicly, but privately, it was always built on my consistency, my hours, my money. She had added style. I had given it structure. She texted again that week. Just one sentence, "This is petty." I didn't respond. Then came the part I'd been expecting. A final attempt to make it seem like I'd gone too far. She called my sister. Told her I'd shut her out of everything, that I'd taken the business from under her, that I was doing this to hurt her. My sister asked her what exactly she thought was hers. Laura didn't have an answer. I know because my sister called me right after, voice steady. She thought she could rewrite the whole story, she said. Guess you kept the pen. It wasn't revenge I wanted. It was clarity. And by Thursday, I finally had it. I got a notice that the legal restructuring of the business was finalized. Her name wasn't on the documents. It hadn't been for some time. She'd signed her approval during the last renewal cycle, just like she always did, rushed, distracted, not really reading. Now she was finding out what that meant. Not through lawyers or lawsuits, but through locked dashboards, bounced emails, and closed doors. Quiet. Final. She posted a photo of herself at a coffee shop, captioned with something about starting from scratch. She didn't mention me. Didn't mention the business. But in the background, sitting just out of focus, was that same birthday card envelope. The one I'd seen weeks ago. I recognized the handwriting on the front, even from the blur. Dylan hadn't gone anywhere. He just wasn't part of the story she thought she was building. Funny how the woman who once joked I was her backup plan, now had no plan at all. She'd left thinking she could come back if she needed to. Thinking I'd stay frozen in place until she made up her mind. But she'd misread the timing. She was already on the wrong page. The story was shifting now. She just didn't know what page she was already on, or how few were left. The email came through on a Wednesday morning, just after I finished my second cup of coffee. Subject line, trademark registration approved. I opened it, read the details, and stared at the final line confirming my sole ownership of the new brand, registration complete, status active, no competing claims on file. I didn't smile. I didn't even exhale. But something shifted. Like furniture being set down in a room that had been echoing too long. It wasn't revenge. It was restoration. And for the first time in a long while, I felt the ground level out beneath me. Later that afternoon, I received a voicemail. Laura. Her tone was calmer than it had been the last few weeks, but it had an edge I recognized. The kind she used when she thought she still had leverage. I know you've moved things around, she said. I know what you've been doing. But this isn't over. Call me back. I didn't. 2 days after that, Nikki called me, first time in months. She sounded uncomfortable, like she wasn't sure if she should be the one delivering the message. I know things have been messy, she said. But I thought you should know, Laura missed a buyer meeting this morning. Just didn't show. She was supposed to pitch the rebrand. She texted me last night, said she was dealing with something personal. She hasn't answered since. I told her thanks for letting me know. I didn't ask what something personal meant. I already knew. The day after that, a letter arrived from her lawyer. Not a demand. Not a threat. Just a request for clarification. It asked about informal partnership structures, hinted at good faith verbal agreements, and referenced contributions made outside of formal documentation. My attorney scanned it, then laughed once under his breath and said, "They don't have a leg to stand on." We replied with copies of her signed offboarding from last year, the asset transfer paperwork she initialed without reading, and the time-stamped correspondence from the filing process. Everything signed. Everything clean. She sent me a text later that night. Just one line, "So you had this ready the whole time?" I read it. Didn't reply. But she wasn't wrong. The night I heard her say I was the fallback, nothing dramatic happened. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just stood there in the dark and saw things clearly for the first time. And the next morning, while she slept off the wine and laughter, I started the process of making sure I was never in that position again. That's when I reopened my father's old blue journal. Flipped to the back where he kept the shorter entries, the colder ones. He'd written once, "Don't let them push you out of your own story. If they're rewriting it, make sure they're using the wrong draft." That was the line that stuck. I moved carefully. Quietly. The new brand name, the new site, the updated tax structure, the dissolved LLC, all legal, all signed, all filed over time with the kind of patience people mistake for detachment. She was too distracted to notice. Caught up in her daydream of Santa Cruz and long weekends with Dylan and starting something new and real. But she never read the paperwork. Never asked why the renewals were coming through in my name. Never thought the backup plan might be making plans of his own. The last time she came to the house, she stood on the porch with her arms crossed and asked if I was trying to erase her. "You're cutting me out of everything we built," she said. I looked at her and said, "You cut yourself out the night you told your friends I was just the safe choice." She didn't deny it. She just looked away and said, "That wasn't the whole story." I nodded. No. But it was enough. After she left, I went into the office, the one she used to use for her jewelry work, and opened the drawer that always stuck halfway open. I folded the trademark confirmation letter once, tight and even. She used to tease me about folding my socks the same way. Called it obsessive. Maybe it was. But I knew she'd find the letter. That drawer always stuck halfway. Always had. That's how I know she'll find it. And when she does, I imagine her face. That quiet inhale she used to make when something clicked too late. When she realized she'd missed something important. She'll read that page and understand it's not just a certificate. It's a mirror. A reflection of every shortcut she took. Every time she assumed I'd be standing there when the other plan fell through. Every word she laughed through in the backyard, thinking it would never come back to her. She once said I was the fallback. But I was just the finish line. She thought she had time. Thought she could drift, return, reset. But I wasn't waiting on her. I was waiting on the paperwork. Everything else already belonged to me. The business. The clients. The story. And now, so did the ending. She thought I was the man waiting. I was. But not for her. I just waited, and aimed.